Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhanaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahoy Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvi Shravahoy. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om Aim Hring Sarvadeva Devi Swarupaya Shri Sharda Ramakrishna Vivekanandaya Namaha. So it's been a couple of weeks, and I think we should back up a couple of verses so that we remain in a flow of what the teachings have been. Yes. Actually, just backing up to the 4th verse will help. Wondering at the nature of these worlds and their offshoots, I came to know of the 3 eternal gateways. Remember, the 3 eternal gateways are adharma, dharma, and svadharma. And that means adharma is not being involved in any form of spiritual pursuit. It's sometimes called unrighteousness, but in the West, we kind of have a problem with that term. So let's just say it's a secular, worldly pursuits, and it can go further than that, being evil. It can also include that. And dharma, of course, is a life lived in the pursuit of spiritual knowledge or spiritual realization of God. And svadharma is especially our highest path. This is when we realize the highest truth. So like that area of dharma refers to all the different kinds of spiritual practices that we engage in for purification of the mind. So abandoning adharma, that's what's meant by unrighteousness here, I resorted to the 2 kinds of knowledge and attained to the 4 fruits of life. Now it's significant that he says, abandoning this adharma, I resorted, or worldliness, or secularism, or materialism, I resorted to the 2 kinds of knowledge. And those 2 kinds of knowledge are knowledge pertaining to everything that happens in phenomena within the context of time, space, causation, name, and form. That's all the lower knowledge. And it runs the gamut from what is exceedingly low to what is the highest flights of the intellect. So it's a very, this lower knowledge is very, very important. And we saw that it was connected to the Vedic ideal of Abhyudaya, which is the material well-being of all beings. Then he resorted to the 2 kinds of knowledge, and of course the higher knowledge, paravidya, is that realization of the highest truth. And in some schools of thought, it includes all of the teachings of the revealed scriptures. That knowledge, which pertains to the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of reality or God, and the relationship between those 2, and also the nature of the world to some extent. And then by resorting to those 2 kinds of knowledge, I attained the 4 fruits of life, which is dharma. When you know the difference between lower knowledge and higher knowledge, you begin to get discrimination. And then renunciation is when you start heading to the higher levels of lower knowledge and into the higher knowledge. And the 4 fruits of life is that dharma, followed by material well-being earned in a dharmic manner, and then also satisfaction of legitimate earthly desires, followed by liberation. So by resorting to the two kinds of knowledge, and we know that this being is always tracking the highest everywhere he goes or she goes, therefore she attained the four fruits of life. So now we come to verse 5, and this reads, "Coming to know of people's attachment to lower knowledge, I perceived two types of ego. Seeking maturity, I plunged into the two great philosophical streams to be free of ownership and agency." So this is all very, very significant. What the singer of this stotram or this song is saying is that he saw the connection between lower knowledge and the unripe ego. He saw the two kinds of ego. The unripe ego is going to fixate on on all of phenomena and want to possess it and do things with it and hoard it. But the higher one is seeking a higher track, is going to be more aligned with the paravidya. So he resorted, so seeking maturity, knowing that there's these two types of ego, how does one go about ripening the unripe ego into the quote unquote ripe ego, the sakshi ahamkara, that movement of the ego that is based in the witness of phenomena, and then at the highest level becomes the param ahamkara, which is realized by great beings who still maintain a connection to the phenomenal worlds. Beyond that is beyond that. So in order to do this, he plunged into the two great philosophical streams, which we'll see is the Vedic stream and the Tantric stream. And he did this to be free of ownership and agency. So this is where we are today. We are going to study the two great philosophical streams and also this issue of ownership and agency, which is going to take us back into the two forms of ego. Kind of jumping to the chase here. Without dharma and without exemplars of the spiritual path and the blessedness and peace that comes with it to those who realize, how do we mature ourselves without these examples? We know in the great poems of Ramprasad Sen, at one point he says, everyone lives in pallid imitation of everyone else, hoping to find the true way. And this pallid imitation we looked at earlier in terms of the Ashana-trayam, where when it's a source of bondage, Ashana-trayam meaning bondage to spouse, to wealth, and to progeny, that when we engage in those things in a place of bondage, in a place of attachment, then we're just engaged in eating, drinking, working, seeking pleasure, shunning pain, and all of these things equal karma, and of different kinds, whether it's whether it's good karma, bad karma, or mixed karma, which Babaji is always telling us is the most confusing of all. So outside of dharma, everyone is preoccupied with this changing phenomena and unaware of their higher nature. So because it makes a little more sense to me to begin with the issue of ownership and agency, let's go ahead and jump to a chart about that. I know we're familiar with this chart, but repetition is the spice of spiritual life, or if not the spice, definitely the salt. And when Babaji presents this teaching in this chart, he also links it up to the 3 stages of the mind's evolution. And these two work very, very well together. Let's start with the 3 stages of the mind's evolution. These are brooding mind, illumined mind, and thinking mind. In the case of brooding mind, what would one brood on? One would brood on everything that is involved in phenomena, things that are happening in daily life, objects that one has in one's life or desires in one's life, situations with individuals, positive, negative, and mixed, attachments, aversions, sorrows, regrets. All of these things are sources of brooding. And at the root of that is this ego, this lower ego, which, when we talk about it, we just have to also go back to this idea of the covering of ignorance over our true self. So avidya, and then ignorance, egotism, then attachment and aversion, then clinging to life or fear of death. All of these things are wrapped up in the lower movement of the ego. So this brooding mind is all involved in attachment and aversion, clinging to life, and such things. In the case of thinking mind, a person, I think we can all think back in our life when we were preoccupied with daily life and everything that goes on in daily life, and we were terribly affected by the different things that would pop up every day. Happiness, sorrow, we were constantly being pushed one way or another. And we didn't know that there was a stable self that we could take recourse to. And that was actually the very source of the sense of I, even in the unripe ego. But we had covered it over with all these movements of the mind and the senses outward to their objects. So I think we all remember a point in our lives where we suddenly heard about the self and we heard about spiritual practice and we began to engage in study and in practice and meditation and different forms of practice, worship. We learned that we should be doing our actions without expectation, but just doing it from a neutral sense of duty. And so this is where we began to shift into thinking mind. And we engaged the mind in examining and reasoning about everything that's going on. We might remember a time when, after first hearing these truths, we would feel the ego begin to take pride in something or become depressed about something or be very happy about something. And whether it was happy or whether it was sad, whether it was good, whether it was bad, we would, in the, shall we call it euphoria or the intensity of recognition about the path we were walking, that we had to step back from that and remember that those are the 2 movements of the ego, always going towards one pole or another, good to bad, etc. So we engage our thinking mind, and then even more than doing that kind of discrimination is feeding the mind with the words of the scriptures, with the words of the great sages and incarnations and the saints, and rolling it over in our mind. So that is chitta lochana, it's thinking mind. And then finally reaching chitta bhati. This word bhati means light, and chitta refers to the thoughts of the mind or the mind stuff itself. So illumined mind. And that's where we get beyond or we begin to intuit what's beyond time, space, and causation. And so Babaji has a quote here. Overcoming the mind's tendency to brood by utilizing its inherent powers of thoughtful insight, augurs a sure sign of spiritual evolution. Within the still and peaceful atmosphere of wisdom samadhi that results, the mind gets transported back to its original state of blissful, equanimous awareness. So let's take a look at this. Within, this thoughtful insight, this thoughtful reasoning is a sure sign of spiritual evolution. Well, we can certainly see that. Thinking mind is better than brooding mind. But what we may not also, from the introduction to this idea of thinking mind that I didn't quite get to, is that it brings forth over time, if one has a sense of perseverance and keeping the ideal always in the mind, that it will lead to eventually one pointed mind, a totally concentrated mind, and then the different levels of samadhi. So wisdom samadhis, for one, that results. These are still samadhis that are taking place with a sense of duality, but it's up at the higher levels. So it's up at the ripe and ripening ego. And then finally, the mind gets transported back to its original state of blissful, equanimous awareness. So let's take these three and apply them to the three obstacles to self-realization, which the first two are the sense of ownership and the sense of agency, which we saw in the verse that we're studying, that the seer or the speaker of this English Stotram has taken recourse to higher knowledge and wants to mature the ego and overcome the sense of ownership and agency. So the sense of ownership, for those who may be new, are such things as, I possess everything in front of me. I own objects. I am the owner of objects. I am the owner of ideas and of knowledge. I'm the owner of my actions, and that's getting into agency, the sense of agency. And this attention to the sense of ownership is another way of tightening that condition over the sense of individuality. So here we have the Atman. I mean, that's what we are. We are this indivisible Atman that is one with Brahman. And it's homogeneous, it's unoriginated, it's unchanging. But through this concealing power of tamas or ignorance, there arises a line of demarcation, apparently, between the Atman and an individual self. We should be the indivisible self, but we are now dreaming ourselves as an individual self. And when we then take the next step and say, this is my body, this is my mind, this is my house, these are my parents, my relatives, my town, my nation, and so forth, then we are concentrating this even more and making it even more rigid and impermeable. It ceases to be individuality at this point, ceases to be a vehicle for consciousness operating in phenomena, and just we become the vehicle, and that's so limiting. So we have a quote here from Sri Ramakrishna: I am the doer. My actions are important. I do good to others. These are signs of the unripe ego. And this is also in the context of the sense of ownership. Now, in the sense of agency, I'm thinking now we could have played before our class, we could have played that beautiful song that says, I am the house and you are the indweller. I am the machine, but you are the operator. I move, O mother, as you move me. So the sense of agency is not only are we creating karma with the sense of ownership just through our thoughts around it, but all those things that we think we own, from objects to thoughts to knowledge to relationships to action, etc., these are creating karma. And the sense of I am doing is solidifying that and creating and deepening that karma. So Sri Ramakrishna also says, pride in one's wealth, in one's learning, and in one's possessions leaves a stain on the mind. So this stain, I mean, there's karma that comes back at us from our actions. If we're engaging with a sense of possessorship, ownership about things, then it's not selfless, is it? There's going to be, we're doing it for a reason that we have an attachment to. And so therefore, there's going to be karma from that. We keep repeating these sorts of actions, and this stain that Sri Ramakrishna is talking about are samskaras. And so then it becomes a habit and a tendency, and we take it with us into the next lifetime. Not only that, we're up using the ones that we brought with us from prior lifetimes. So then there's the sense of separation. And Sri Ramakrishna has this quote: Prahlada had two moods. Sometimes he would feel that he was God. In that mood, he would say, Thou art verily I. But when he was conscious of his ego, he looked upon God as his master and himself as the servant. And so here we begin to see how we begin to mature our ego and begin to attenuate the sense of ownership and the sense of agency. So I'm just going to keep that up and then read some things from Babaji's chapter on the three obstacles to self-realization. He writes, the solution for the pervasive sense of ownership that occupies the unripe mind and ego complex at the early stages of a human mind's evolution is done in this manner, by slowly comprehending the impermanent nature of any and all physical objects. The mind can achieve detachment based upon knowing the nature of all phenomena to be transitory, and a healthy equanimity can be attained. With regard to agency and solution, with regard to the sense of agency, without this knowledge of a higher and more complete state of being, i.e. the Atman, than the consciousness of the normal mind, without knowing there's something besides this normal mind that's constantly outward going through the senses to the objects, the actions of human beings are not only limited and uninformed, they are outright traps. Each act accomplished accomplished out of the lack of awareness of higher mind or spirit, becomes a karma-bearing device replete with backlashes that arise unexpectedly in the context of human endeavor in everyday life. The what have I done to deserve this syndrome then swiftly deteriorates into the woe is me predicament, and then declines into the all is lost situation. Thus, the sense of agency reaches its most detrimental level, and even the selfish ego rues its outcome. So here, we really see the when we talk about the pervasiveness of suffering in life, this is what it's all based on. It's based upon ownership and agency, because these things are traps and they're constantly locking us into cycles of cause and effect. So he goes on, Babaji, that is. The sense of agency has its solution as well. The I think, I do, I will of the mind-ego complex must be transformed into not I but thou, to quote Sri Ramakrishna. The offering of one's will and one's thoughts and one's actions to the source of awareness is the wisest move anyone can consider and achieves immediate positive results depending on the sincerity and sufficiency of the offering. So, offering one's thoughts, one's sense of willing, and one's actions to the source of awareness or to one's chosen ideal is the wisest move anyone can consider and achieves the immediate positive results depending upon the sincerity of the offering. This is due to the fact that the ordinary mind knows literally nothing, and the unripe ego has no idea how to guide the human vehicle through the occurrences that are continually rising and falling in relative existence. Think about that. This is back to that pallid imitation of everyone else. We see everybody else getting up in the morning, getting ready for work, having breakfast, going to work, doing the daily acts, never even thinking about God by accident for those who are not walking a spiritual path, and having to rely wholly on their own ignorant resources or the ignorant resources of others, falling into that place of attachment and aversion to everything, a reactive mind, which creates even more karma. All of this is part of that pervasive suffering. So we have to step off of that track. So the ordinary mind and the ordinary mind of others literally know nothing, and the unripe ego has no idea how to guide the human vehicle through occurrences continually arising and falling in relative existence. There is a higher guide, and this vehicle must be sought out and supplicated. To the beings of the earth and the devotees of the Lord, this guide is called the Divine Mother of the universe. And maybe we don't, in walking whatever path we're walking, maybe it's not referred to as the Divine Mother of the universe, but that dynamic divine power moving through the world secretly, but known to those who finally want to turn away from this closed circle of ownership and agency and the sense of separation from our source or from God, or from our Atman. We can call her the Divine Mother of the universe. So he goes on in that chapter, and I'm just kind of highlighting a few things. He says, and this is why, I thought about this when I came across this verse. Why is the singer of this Stotram, this hymn, saying that he took recourse to the two philosophical streams in order to overcome ownership and agency? Why didn't he also mention the sense of separation? And it's because he was, I think, being efficient, because by overcoming the sense of ownership and agency, this leads to the end of separation. And Babaji describes it this way. It is the erosion and breakdown of the ultimately erroneous concepts of ownership and agency that finally lead to the fall of the facade of personal identity and separate individuality. Now let's just stop here, because the facade of personal identity, we have to keep going back to this idea that ultimate reality is indivisible and homogeneous, its existence, its awareness, and its bliss absolute. And it can never be divided, but it only appears divided, and that is through ignorance, as Vedanta puts it, or through the covering of tamas, the of the gunas, that covering of tamas, which conceals the nature of reality. So if we think about what's absolutely true, that there's only this reality, and that it only appears that there are all these individuals, then this sense of identity is not actually true. It's erroneous. And the ownership that comes, the sense of ownership that develops in it, and the sense of agency that develops in it, is also not true. It's just a dream. And all the power possible, all the awareness that's used in these feelings of ownership, these actions of agency, is all the one source operating all these different things. So as we break down the sense of, of ownership and agency, we are breaking down and attenuating this sense of personal identity and separate individuality. With the coveting of objects and the inadvertent pride and pretense of selfish activity out of the way, there is simply no foundation upon which the flimsy ego structure can maintain itself. And the house of mirrors, which is the residence of the ego complex, verily comes crashing down. So I find that very beautiful. So are there any questions or thoughts at this point before I move on?
Just one thing. I find a correlation somewhat between brooding mind, thinking mind, and illumined mind with Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhasanam. So the Shravanam is not really brooding mind, but thinking mind. It's when you start rolling. There's some action going on. And
Right.
it's there's like a light in the attic, and
Yes.
there's some. So you're even though you may not be illumined, you're still considering. It's a level higher than brooding, and then illumined mind is very much like Nididhasanam.
Yeah, that's a good correlation. I would say that that the Shravana part has to be put up with the thinking mind, actually.
Yeah, true.
Shravana and Manana. Yeah, that's
although,
a good correlation.
Although the Shravanam, you're not really thinking; you're receiving, but you're receiving in more of an alert state than brooding intimates. So
right.
it's although you can actually hear the truth in a brooding state, but Mananam is when you become active. It's a subtle distinction. But,
no, and it's a good distinction to make too, because it also brings in a practice that begins that maturing of the ego, and the attenuating of the sense of ownership and the sense of agency. Also, that other thing that you said, you can do your Shravana, and of course, Shravana means that we're supposed to be listening to higher truth, but you can do it from a brooding state of mind, and that's really dangerous. We don't want to go to our teacher or to our scriptures with a lower movement of the mind, because then you don't hear it right.
Yeah, but I think about it when I was a teenager, as a press teenager in Brooklyn, listening to Lex Hickson's radio program. That was like a lighthouse cutting through the fog of my middle class conventional existence. So even though I was in a brooding state, that was, I was kind of hearing the signal. So that kind of cut through my Thomas. So even though it's not an ideal state to be receiving the teachings in, because you're clouded, it can pierce through the Thomas and start to kindle that flame a little bit.
Yeah, the very fact of yearning in there is part of what's cutting through that.
Yeah. And why, I think a big reason for brooding is that one realizes that, that there's a light that's being covered. At least that was my experience in my brooding days. Realizing that there was so much more than the mediocrity I was experiencing.
Yeah.
So you have a sense of some kind of illumined state, because it's the Atman can be covered, but it can't be snuffed out. So yeah.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, let's move on and take a look at the two great philosophical streams. And as Babaji would put it, this is one of our war horses. But since the seminar that we had last week had so much to do with universality, this is a beautiful chart to show how that is in the Sanatana Dharma. So Sanatana Dharma means the eternal religion. And this means religion with a capital R, or let's just say the eternal truth that is unoriginated and unchanging, and how in India it has manifested all these different aspects that are complementary. In the West, we often don't have, we have this sense that you have to tread, well, we should all tread one path deeply. That goes without saying. Otherwise, we're not going to reach the source if we're constantly bouncing back and forth. But this idea that all paths are true and that all paths sincerely walked are going to take one to the goal of human existence. So let's see how these how this teaching comes about here. So I want to do a little introduction. In fact, I think I started too soon with sharing the chart. Let me read out something here. Those of us who've been studying the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, who are part of the Ramakrishna lineage, as we are in the SRV associations, will be familiar with how, as you read the Gospel, especially in the beginning, it just sounds like one thing. But Sri Ramakrishna is pulling from all different kinds of approaches. And Babaji describes that in this way. When we study the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we find that though he taught the truths contained in the Upanishads, he illustrated these principles by methods that are often tantric in origin and flavor. His worship of, devotion, and embodiment of Mother Kali, Sri Krishna, Mother Sita, Chaitanya, and Shiva reveal his wonderful tantric nature and reveal many diverse ways of practicing the Vedic truths. Okay, so in the Vedic path, along the Vedas consist of 4 different sections, each one. There's four, sometimes they say there's 5 Vedas, and the main 4 Vedas have 4 sections, and the last one is the Upanishads, which are the distilled realizations of the seers. And when we talk about Vedanta, we talk about the teachings directly out of the Upanishads. And so he taught these things, such things as Atman and Brahman are one. That's the conclusion of Vedanta, is that Atman, the apparently individualized self, is one with Brahman, the absolute. Anyway, and that this reality gets covered, and that over time gets called Maya, but it has other different kinds of names along the way. Anyway, he illustrated these principles by methods that are often tantric in origin and flavor. And Tantra is focused, initially at least, more on deification. So along the Vedic path, we are learning about, we're following the teaching starting with Samkhya, which give us the 24 cosmic principles, along with what is not the 24 cosmic principles, which is the Purusha. Later on, as we move towards Vedanta, we get, instead of talking about Purusha, we're talking about Atman and Brahman. And then yoga along the way gives us our practice, and so does Tantra. So let's move on here. This is, if we carefully examine the message of Indian philosophy, we will see that it is Vedic in essence and Tantric by path and process. So here we're talking about Indian philosophy as a whole. It is Vedic in essence and Tantric by path and process. And we can also include yoga in there. And that these two are happily married in the Advaitic or non-dual perspective. This is a synchronicity, and let me go ahead and share my screen again. This is a synchronicity that includes the 6 orthodox darshanas, which we see right here in this box. We have Samkhya, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Purvamamamsa, Vedanta, and Yoga. And it includes in its vast sweep and domain, which aren't shown here, even the Nastika, the unorthodox religions of India, such as Buddhism and Jainism. Again, we're talking about Indian philosophy as a whole. In India, this all-inclusive realm of religious pluralism is given the name Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion with a capital R, for it includes and perceives all these approaches as valid and authentic ways to God. So let's take a look at this chart. And we can read this quote right here. Let me make it bigger for you. Philosophy in India never stands sundered from religion. It is never considered as divested of religious life and living. Further, every system has its own value in its own particular region. The various interpretations of the scriptures are therefore tenable from the standpoint of the various temperaments of individuals forming different religious sects. And this is from Sri Manoranjan Basu. So let's take a look at all the things that, maybe not all, but many of the things that this Indian philosophy as a whole includes. And notice that we have the Vedic stream at the top here, and it's pointing to these 6 orthodox systems of philosophy, which give us our ability to discriminate between the real and the real, the real and the unreal. In other words, the eternal and the non-eternal. And to practice and purify the mind system, the mental apparatus, and then finally the Vedanta that charts out a path through dualism, qualified non-dualism, and Advaita, non-dualism. And we're not going to say too much about these other 3, which aren't used as much right now, but they are still studied. And so then on this side of the chart, we have the tantric stream. And included in this tantric stream are the 5 main sects. So in a sense, we could say that the Vedic stream seems to represent, this is superficial, I have to say this. This is a superficial way of putting it. But the Vedic stream gives us the philosophical knowledge portion, and the tantric stream gives us the devotional worship side of things. However, as we also know, there's plenty of philosophy in Tantra. Still, it's oriented in understanding the deities and bringing them recognizing them inside. Again, this is just a very superficial overview. So up at the top and related, Babaji shows us that what's operating through all these systems is these three stages of philosophy: dualism, qualified non-dualism, and non-dualism itself. And let me say something about these different stages. So in non-dualism, the main one of the main exponents is Shankaracharya. And summarizing his teaching, we would say that Brahman, the absolute existence, consciousness, and bliss, is real. The universe is unreal. Brahman and Atman are one. The phenomenal universe has no objective reality and is a misreading of Brahman. So when we think about the classes that we've had recently with Babaji about ajativada, or non-origination, the idea is that phenomena arises and falls. It's never created. It's never lasting. And when we see it, it's a misreading of Brahman, because in truth, only Brahman exists. When a wave, so we have the ocean, and when the water of the ocean takes the form of a wave, we call it a wave, but it's really only water. But because it has come into this form, we give it another name. So the name and the form aren't the reality. The water is the reality. In the same way, it's not the phenomena that's the reality, but Brahman is the reality. So in qualified non-dualism, the main exponent is Ramanuja. And here I'm going to be referring to the Spiritual Heritage of India, written by Swami Prabhavananda, who he did yeoman's work in explaining Indian philosophical systems for us, both the orthodox and the non-orthodox. It's a fantastic textbook. He says, Ramanuja argues that God and the souls of beings are not the same, though they are not separate from each other, and that the highest ideal and the ultimate goal are to love and worship God and surrender ourselves utterly and completely to Him. The material world and human beings, though different, have a real existence of their own as the body of Brahman. So it's a real existence as the body of Brahman, who is their soul and controlling power. Apart from Brahman, they are literally non-entities. So Ramanuja's philosophy, known as qualified non-dualism, is known as qualified non-dualism because it admits the plurality both of matter and of souls. Okay, so there's a philosophical system that fits. There's quite a number of schools of philosophy that fit this particular overall niche umbrella, that are beta, so difference in non-difference. And they're all very, very beautiful. And Sri Ramakrishna taught very much from this particular perspective, because for those beings who are yearning, for those beings who've begun to feel the presence of God within themselves, then those were mostly the beings that were coming to him. And so this was the perfect platform for talking to them about spiritual practice and spiritual realization. So then dualism is, its main proponent is Madhva. And his whole philosophy, as in the way that Swami Prabhavananda has expressed it, is thus based upon the idea of difference or distinction. So we have Shankara non-dualism, which is there is no difference, there's no origination, there's no transformation. Then we have Ramanuja, which says there's difference, but there's difference, but there's non-separation at the same time. And now Madhva says that there is difference and there is distinction. And distinctions are known to be 5 in number. God is distinct from individual souls. God is distinct from non-living matter. One individual soul is distinct from every other. Individual souls are distinct from matter. In matter, when it is divided, the parts are distinct from one another. So everything is actually separate. But he also says, and that didn't come out in this section, they all depend upon God. So there's going to be this eternal separation there. But the purpose of life is still to absolutely surrender oneself to God and strive to attain heaven and live in eternal felicity with God. So those are those 3, and they match very much the different perspectives that beings have to pass through. So this is a very, what to say, it's extremely compassionate. It's a very compassionate way of looking at beings walking the spiritual path, and it's accommodating. So now, from the standpoint of Advaita, it's seen that dualism and qualified non-dualism are steps along the way. So there's no argument there. And so now when we look at the different practices that people engage in, for today, we, particularly in the teachings that Swami Vivekananda has brought out for this era, are the 4 yogas. And you can see that these 4 yogas can be engaged in from these different standpoints of dualism, qualified non-dualism, and non-dualism. And look at how they're organized on this chart. For the Vedic stream, we're seeing that Jnana Yoga is sort of more, especially the point when we're looking at all these 6 orthodox darshanas, and bhakti and dualism. So here we have Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of wisdom. It's especially tied to non-dualism. And we have these systems of philosophy. And then we have dualism and bhakti yoga, especially on the tantric stream side, but none of these things are airtight. And this is, again, one of the beautiful features of Indian philosophy and practice, that we have here in the middle things that go both ways. We have the qualified non-dualism, which goes in both directions. You can practice worship from dualism and also qualified non-dualism. You can practice Raja Yoga, meditation on the deities. You can practice the yoga of meditation more on the cosmic principles, all the way on up to the mind, etc., and the Mahat. And everybody acts. So Karma Yoga is going in both directions too, that we put our philosophy into action through the practice of karma yoga, selfless action, consecrated action. And from the standpoint of the tantric stream, we are engaging in our acts from a state of worship. So the other thing, and I remember when the first time that Babaji was teaching this in SRV, that the thing that struck me most was that these philosophical systems, which just seem knowledge oriented, everybody could choose the one they wanted. Okay, I like Vedanta, or I like yoga, or maybe I like both. but I also have a chosen ideal. And the chosen ideal kind of partakes of the tantric stream. Swami Sheshanandaji used to say that worship was the gift of the tantras. And, the tantra has its non-dual aspect too. I have to say that because when the worship itself matures, then one sees that only God can worship God. That's actually a statement out of the tantras, and all the different rituals in tantric worship, where you are the purifications that the worshiper goes through, are all about identifying every part of the body, every part of the prana, every part of uh, the mental complex with aspects of the Lord or the Mother that is being worshipped. So anyway, so everyone, just just about everyone in following any one of these orthodox darshanas has a chosen ideal, and so you see that they're partaking of the tantric stream. So this is one of the things that that gets pulled out. And I'm looking for a particular quote here. And I may not find it. Let me see if it's here. No, not that either. Huh. Okay. Here it is. He writes, a study of the two great streams of Tantra and Vedanta, with their main tributaries of Samkhya and Yoga, is very beneficial. He goes on, piercing the veils of Maya, that's the covering power and distorting power, piercing the veils of Maya in order to apprehend what is real and what is unreal is the emphasis of Vedanta, or the Vedic stream. So knowledge of its truth will destroy the ignorance in the mind, because it is this ignorance that is hiding the truth of our true nature. Then, bringing about the mind's deification of the world as the play of Shiva and Shakti is a salient feature of the tantric path. So it is well suited to this age, where beings have forgotten that mankind and Mother Earth, seen rightly, are expressions of Brahman's perfection. So we're going to go ahead and close here. I see that there's a question or something. Never mind. So we will go ahead and close with a prayer. Om Asato Ma Sat Gamoya, Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamoya, Mrichur Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abhira Bhira Maeti, Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam, Tenamam Pahinichum, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from the illusion of death to realization of eternal existence. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste, everyone.